And welcome back to another recording of the Content Marketing Studio. We're back for another season to help you create better online content faster. Today, I'm going to put a spotlight on a very good friend of mine to look at ways to explore online marketing differently, to build your brand online, and of course, drive sales for your business. I am your host, Pascal Fintoni, and today I'm joined by none other than Gudrun Lauret, content producer and content strategist. Gudrun, welcome to the Content Marketing Studio.
Hi, Pascal. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I think this is your second appearance on the Content Marketing Studio. You were invited for season 1 quite some time ago, and you're now back for what is unofficially season 2.
Excellent. Well, you know better than me. It seems it's been such a long time since we've seen each other in real life that I don't think I can remember anything.
No, that's right. I was going to ask you, as I always start now this new season, with 2 questions. Where are you and how are you doing?
Yes, well, I am in a grey and overcast Gateshead. It's threatening rain again, and I am pretty good. It's Fridays we're recording this, which is nice. I'm in my office. The dog is loitering somewhere, so should be agitating to go OUT. But yeah, all's pretty good, thank you.
Because obviously I always need to ask you where you are because you travel quite extensively, although, you were doing it properly and respecting old safety guidelines, of course.
That's correct.
Nice to have you back in our Northeast so you can enjoy this cold winter with us.
Yes, I'm glad to be here just in time for more rain and snow.
So as I mentioned a moment ago, Gudrun is obviously a content producer. We'll talk about that in her career in the world of writing, but also has become over time a content strategist, helping people with their personal brand and business brand online. But one thing we'll explore as part of this discussion is also her special program for Heritage Organization, where, according to her website, she brings the modern marketing methods for the traditional heritage sector. And one thing we'll explore with you as well, Gudrun, is your own podcast, Timepieces History. It's now become quite an extensive podcast, so we look at this to begin with. But can we begin with, I've known you for many years, and from the get-go, your passion for the written word was, very, very evident. Where did that come from? Were you already writing stories as a child or things like
this? Yes, yes, I was. I was one of those kids that was an early reader. And my mum has a favourite story of taking me into a bookshop. And I don't know if you remember, that it's probably still the same now, but when I was a kid, you used to just be able to let the kids run wild and they used to grab the books off the shelves. And my mum found me with a book in my lap, surrounded by grown-ups, and I was reading the book. But what was actually happening was that I was just making it up. So there was all these adults.
Because you couldn't read, or because it was boring when you were reading?
Because I couldn't read. I was about 2, so I always had this active imagination. I used to write my own stories about My Little Pony, which my mum had to write for me because I couldn't write. And then when I got a bit older, I used to write my own newspaper, which was just for my own benefit and those around me, whether they wanted to read it or not.
So a newspaper with a circulation of 1, just you?
That's right. I used to go to my grandparents in York, and I used to peer out of their back window and write articles about comings and goings, which was, the car park is very full today, and things like that. They were right over the back of the swimming pool, so I used to spy on people. So yeah, I've always been a writer since, as I said before, I could write and before I could read. It was the only thing that really interested me, and I think because I did so much reading and got into that world, that it was just a natural progression for me to become a writer professionally.
Do you know, it's fascinating because all the content creators I speak to, whether as part of this show or just, individually, there's always something that goes back to childhood. Our very good friend Amy Woods, tells about how, very much like you, she used to have her own little magazine that she used to make up, for the family and stuff like that, which is absolutely lovely. I mean, as you know, the written word is something that is a challenge for me. I much prefer video as a format. I find that I can write, but after a while, I run out of steam very, very quickly. But certainly, just to kind of echo your little story, when I was a child, we couldn't go to the movies very often. It was very far away. There was four of us as well, so that was quite expensive for my parents to take us. But I knew there were movies around, so what I used to do sometimes, I used to cut, for example, an image from the TV guide. Of course, we don't have those anymore, but and we used to have a TV guide in the house, and I used to be able to cut an image from a movie, and then I would write around the image what the story was. I didn't know what it was because I never seen the movie, but I used to make it up. But I used to have a deal with my dad where I could not cut images from basically the day where so I had to wait for if it was a Wednesday, I could only cut the images from the Tuesday because otherwise my parents couldn't read the TV guide because it was full of holes.
And you'd have no idea what was coming on this week because, of course, we didn't have the internet or anything like that. And
no.
yes, TV guide was essential, wasn't it?
And I mean, I think I'm assuming there are no TV guides anymore because I don't use them. But back then, we had maybe 3 channels in France, so that wasn't hard to keep for a TV guide to be produced. I don't know whether they would do one now with Freeview and Freesat. It would be just the size of a Yellow Pages.
They'd be worn out, wouldn't they? Trying to produce one of them every week.
So, did you get into the professional side of writing immediately? So, or was your career? Did you go off on a tangent a bit and then came back to it?
Technically, I was first published as a writer when I was 14.
Wow.
The Waterstones had at the time a magazine that was called In Brief. It was a national magazine that was book reviews and interviews with children's and teenage authors of the time. And it happened to be based in Newcastle upon Tyne in the Waterstones, which is sadly no longer there. I think it was the last time I was there was Byron Burger. And it was teenagers from the local schools participated. And my English teacher at the time got me in. And every week we meet on a Friday. We'd be given new books to pick and take home, and the rule was you had 1 week to read it and write a review. You brought the review back with you, and it was critiqued by your peers, which was pretty nerve-wracking. So I did that, and then we used to interview authors at the time. We interviewed Nina Borden, who wrote Carrie's War, and anybody who had a new book out, we interviewed them. So that was where I started. I did journalism after my A-levels, and I worked for the Crack magazine in Newcastle. And then journalism was hard to get into 20 years ago, harder than it is, almost as hard as it is now. Well, not as hard, because obviously journalism is dead in the water. But while I was trying to find a proper job, my mum suggested admin as a short-term step, and I ended up stuck in admin for more than a decade. And so I worked for various local authorities, for the NHS, for different health authorities, until finally I thought, this is not what I wanted to do. This is not what 4-year-old Gudrun had planned. And so about 7 years ago, I set up as self-employed, and 5 years ago decided to focus entirely on the writing. So yeah, it took me quite a while, but I did write off and on for publications. So yeah, a little deviation, but we're back to where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's the case for many of us. It's funny when you have a true calling, you will always go back to that and find a way to make it part of who you are and what you want to do. So can I begin with that first term that I use for you, which is a correct term, content strategist, where you would help somebody so that could be somebody that would be new to this idea of building a reputation for themselves or the business using content, or maybe someone that's been doing content creation for a while, but perhaps in the process got themselves a bit lost. So what steps would you take us to reconnect with, that, to have a clearer strategy and one that brings about better results?
I think first of all, you've got to be clear on who your customer is, or your target audience. Who are you talking to? What is it you want them to know? If you've already been producing content for a while, I've worked with a lot of the big hitters, the influencers, and they have a lot of content that's scattergun. So for them, we would be pulling that back and saying, this is what you've got. Let's see, is it still useful? Is it speaking to your audience? Are you using a medium that they like? I'm a writer, so I would always prefer to write and read. But as you said, you're a video person. So it's also about what do they want? How do they want to consume that content? So you need to think about that. But you also need to be comfortable with it. If you're really, really not comfortable with doing video, you're only going to make yourself miserable and you're not going to produce that content. So I think you've got to be realistic as well. So it's a case of looking at who you're talking to, what you want them to know, and how you're going to share that message with them. And then you need to put in a plan, so a content calendar in whatever format that's going to be. And we would look at things that would be useful, and then repurposing your content if you've already got it, and if not, starting from the beginning. I think a lot of people would go to blogging first because they think that's cheapest and easiest. But of course, writing is time consuming, and with smartphones and everything, that's not necessarily the case. But it can be a nice, gentle way to ease yourself into the world of content marketing, and at least that way you can get a bank of blogs ready to go. You can have them scheduled. You can share them on social media. So that is a nice way to start. You might want to get somebody else to write them for you if writing's not your favorite thing. So yeah, it's about an overall view of your business, your goals, and who you're talking to. I think that's the best way to start with it.
Do you have, because you started by saying, you need to kind of understand your audience, and very often we're also busy working that we have a sense of who the audience is, but we don't necessarily know them as content consumers. Back to your point about, well, what do they want to hear? What's going to engage, make them, feel something about that content? Have you found, ways in which you can tease that out of people in conversation during your work?
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of a couple of documents that are sort of mind maps to help people think about their audience. And, unless you're a brand new business, which people I work with very rarely are, you've already worked with people. And so then you go back to saying, who is it you've worked with? What did you enjoy about that work? And more importantly, I think, is what didn't you like? Because I think if you can be clear on who you don't want to work with and what kind of work you don't want to do, that quickly informs the kind of things you do want to do. And I think that's actually an easier way to look at it is, for instance, I don't enjoy doing my accounts. Would I need an account? It's that very basic sort of thing that is actually really helpful. And I think going back and looking at the people you've worked with, but also what kind of things do you really enjoy doing? And you have to accept that you can't be all things to all people, and you shouldn't have to, and you don't really have to do things if you don't like doing them. If you really truly don't enjoy doing them, even if you're good at them, let it go. You can find somebody else, you can outsource it, you can recommend to a client that they source somebody else to do that. But it's about using your talents the best way you can to get the results that your clients want. Yeah. And I think that's important.
And I think, I use that term more and more now in terms of self-awareness, know who you are as a content creator to begin with, know where your talent might lie and explore that thoroughly. And then for the other form of content, find somebody else within your team, or, could be extended team as well. What I know through my work as obviously trainer and consultant is the writing bit seems to always be loaded with angst and tension. People say, well, I'm not good enough, or I suppose for me it's my memories of my French teacher with lots of red across my essay because I didn't. And so there's all this kind of stuff going on in people's head. There's also this kind of slight tension of being judged by your peers within your team environment, but also of course to be judged by your future client and current clients about your ability to craft sentences and use grammar and punctuation. How do you help someone navigate that?
I suppose with the internet and the changes in communication, I think it's less important. I'm an old school writer, and I do think grammar and punctuation is important, but you can find somebody else to help you with that. And I think if you're communicating a message with your ideal customer, existing or potential customers, what they want to know is what you can do. And your passion for that should come through, and how you structure your paragraphs or your sentences is really secondary to communicating that message. So I think put it out there however you want to get it down. Some people prefer to dictate it, and then we can craft it that way. or just write it down and just get somebody else just to put in your commas and your full stops and, tweak your sentences. But it really, don't get hung up on it, because unless you're doing what I do, I don't imagine that most people's customers are going to be judging them on, starting a sentence with but or because. I think you just have to kind of let that go, just get it down. I mean, even professional writers just get things down and then they go back and edit. So there's no reason why you can't do that or ask somebody to do it for you. And remember, you don't have to write reams and reams of information. Keep it short and edit it, or get somebody else to, and you'll be fine. I think people overthink it because, as you've said about, school and red pens, that's in people's heads, and it doesn't need to be. It's not as painful as you think.
How do you help your clients come up with ideas and topics for content? Because I mean, often people said to me, after a while, I think I've exhausted everything I've got to say about this, so I just don't know where else to go with this. And of course, I've got little techniques. Think, oh, I never thought of that. So how do you help your clients as a content strategist to actually see that there's plenty to go after?
I think one of the things you have to do as a modern business is you have to be paying attention to what's going on in the world around you. And you'll always if you read the news or you follow competitors or people in your industry you can collaborate with, you'll always see something that sparks off an idea. At the very beginning, the obvious advice is, what are your frequently asked questions? What do your customers ask the most? You can normally get 20 or 30 ideas from there. Depending on your industry, there might be legal updates that you might want to share with your customers. There might be something that happens in the news that you could pick up on. And also, it's quite useful to be aware of your local community and to find ways of sharing other people's stories. So you don't actually have to be always curating is just as important. And I think nobody exists in a bubble. Well, we all do at the minute, kind of, but in the normal world, we're not in a bubble, and I think if you're aware of what's going on, and you're always gonna, it is hard. It's worth carrying a notebook or having a notes app on your phone, so if you hear something or you see something, jot it down. But the world is always changing, and the world of business is always changing, and if you don't think of it as I must come up with content ideas, and if you just go with the flow and just see what happens. And also, if you're at a point where you're thinking, oh, I really have to write a blog, I really have to create a video, and you're starting to feel the pressure and your mind's gone blank, just get up and do something else. Go for a walk. I always have my best ideas in the shower, which is really annoying because I can't write them down. Just go off and do something else and forget about it. And something will come back to you, something you've heard, something that you've seen. I find it useful to attend industry events, even if that's online at the moment. A throwaway comment in the chat when we're now all using Zoom might spark something off. And it's just about constantly being engaged and aware and interested in what's going on in the world, and you will find something.
Yeah, and I think, where we've gone slightly wrong, I say we just, to kind of summarize the whole industry and different sectors, where content marketing for a while became this strange game of researching keywords and using that as the only reason you come up with content. And I thought, yeah, maybe it's part of it, but like you said, to be aware and to be observant means that you could essentially reflect what happened in the past. And I can say some of my clients have done very well to look back at how things used to be done and how they've changed. Of course, to kind of comment what's happening in the present, but also sometimes think about what the future might look like. So already using what I call the before, during, and after, you already have plenty to go after. So you mentioned the term curation. I'm a huge fan. But do you use that as a technique a lot with your clients?
I do, yeah. I use it myself in my own business, and I would encourage anybody to do that. There's bound to be stuff that you can quickly share. You can subscribe to newsletters if you want. You can follow people on Twitter or LinkedIn. Most industries have an industry body. Share their news, share their updates. If there's a magazine in your field, share that. The benefits of that are obviously, one, it saves you having to come up with ideas, but it also shows that you're generous and willing to share other people's stuff. It shows that you're an expert because you found you're giving your audience the impression, which is true, that you've been off and assessed a whole range of other people's content, and you've cherry picked the things that are most useful to them, that are going to make a difference to them. And so that positions you as the expert. And of course, by sharing more of this content, you're increasing your visibility and the likelihood of new customers finding you. So there's lots of benefits to curation, apart from saving you time if you can't come up with an idea.
I mean, funny enough, curation came late for me. And I realized I was doing so much work to keep myself informed by the wonders of online marketing, but I was skipping it to myself, the article, the podcast, the video that I'd be watching to supplement my training courses or my kind of consultancy work. And I realized, well, that's a bit silly. Why am I not sharing it to others? And then, so I was very late into curation, but now I'm such a huge fan. Can you remind us again about essentially the very ethical and professional way of curating? Because it's very different to plagiarism, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, plagiarism is passing off somebody else's work as your own, which I think is not as easy with the internet and with Web 2.0. The easiest way to curate something really is just to share the original tweet, the original post, the original link, whatever that is, and crediting the person. If you wanted to quote somebody in a blog, for instance, I once reviewed a long time ago a book by Mark Schaefer, who is a bit of a legend in content marketing. And I sent him an email and said, can I quote you in this review? And he said, yes, of course you can. If you're sharing somebody else's content, they're very, very, very unlikely to say no, because you're helping them increase their reach without them having to do the work. Just as you wouldn't in school or at university, you wouldn't pass it off as your own work. Just credit the author. I think on Twitter they used to use HT's hat tip. So it's a quick way of saying, I'm acknowledging that this person created it. If you retweet somebody, then it's very obviously not you, it's them. And if you're really struggling, think, well, how would I like it? How would I like my stuff to be shared? And maybe you've got a little system that you would use, but I think it's a lot harder to pass other people's things off as yours, because even if you didn't credit them, somebody somewhere will have seen that original, and it's just not worth the risk, because once it's online, it's always out there. You can't undo it. No matter what you do, somebody would dig it out. So I don't think you need to worry too much about risking accusations of plagiarism or pinching things. I think it's not as easy now.
I would agree. Let's move on to your special program for heritage organizations, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you come up with that concept, and what was the driver behind it?
It was something I've always been interested in. I think my interest in history has been there almost as long as my interest in writing. I was born and brought up in York, so I was surrounded by the Romans, by the Vikings, by the Tudors, by everything.
Well, no, they were not there, Gudrun. Just, obviously they
were there. They were there. You obviously have never done one of the ghost tours around York. So I was always surrounded by history. Obviously, my family's from the northeast. We're similarly tripping over history here. My weekends were spent in the boot, literally the boot of my dad's Volvo estate. I don't recommend you do that with children these days, but in the 80s it was allowed. We used to go around the castles. We used to go up to Northumberland, go to Bamburgh, go over to Holy Island. My parents were members of the National Trust, so we were at Wallington quite often. So it was always there. It was always part of my life. And over time, I just thought, this is much like writing was my passion. History was the thing that interested me most, and I thought I really would like to bring this into my work. And then as I started to look at it, I realised that for heritage organisations, they're very focused on those traditional ways of marketing, and especially with the lockdown, which hit them pretty hard, they're missing opportunities to use online and digital as well. And I think that's how it came about, that it's not as hard or as expensive as people think, and you can use it quite quickly to make a difference to your business.
Right. And I'm going to quickly mention the podcast. So when did you start the podcast? Because it's becoming quite extensive now.
It started in March. so not that long ago. It was a lockdown project, and some friends of mine held me accountable and said, "You've been talking about this, so you've got to get it done." So I sat down in a cramped corner of the bedroom we were in France during lockdown. I had invested in a I've got it here, my Yeti. And yeah, I just sat down and recorded some podcasts.
Well, not just some, there's a lot of them, but interestingly, you started, if I'm not mistaken, with the biotapestry, which is a fine choice.
Thank you.
Is that because you were in France? You thought I'll start there. Then I'm looking at your website right now. The London Underground. You've got
Yep.
Queen Elizabeth I, Moat and Bailey Castle, Monasteries and Mead. We've got the Gunpowder Plot, Afternoon Tea, The Boogeyman,
Yep.
Oliver Cromwell, Mad Hatters, Pub Names. You've got, marketing tips for heritage sites after lockdown, during lockdown. You've got Shakespeare, author, conspiracy, Bridges Across the Tyne. Oh, you were back home then. Earl Grey, Saltwell Park, Annie Castle, Durham Cathedral, Bounded Castle, Tynemouth Priory and Castle, the Newcastle, Farne Islands, and so on and so on and so on. That is just brilliant. But also, it's almost its own form of microblogging, because you talk about those timepieces for what would be deemed to be short for a podcast, but it kind of works, doesn't it?
Yep, that was the it was I was at a conference. It was the Youpreneur Summit last year, and I'd been talking about my interest in history, and somebody had suggested creating the podcast, and I already had the 100 blogs, which was a separate project I'd done. And so the idea originally was to repurpose that content. As time's gone on, it's been new content that hasn't been published anywhere else. But I spoke to an expert in podcasting, Colin Gray, who said, do 5-minute episodes, because nobody else is doing that. In heritage, nobody else. There's a guy who does these epic 3-hour podcasts about history. Nobody's doing short things. And because I've worked with so many podcasters myself and people who are really, really good at it, I know how to do it. I know what's good, and I know what's bad. So what I liked was the seasonal format. So you produced a certain amount of episodes, a certain number of episodes, and over a period of time, and you have a theme. So that's what I did. So those first ones that you were talking about there are things that, admittedly, the biotapestry is a bit split, but they're very English things. And that was the idea, was to sort of pique people's interest, is to come up with some really English things and share them. And then, because I live here in the Northeast, and I don't think our fantastic history gets talked about enough, I think when people think of the Northeast, they think Newcastle and Party City. And particularly on this side of the water in Gateshead, there's a lot of things that aren't ever looked at. Like Saltwood Park, Saltwood Towers. The guy who built Saltwood Towers was a key businessman in the area. And so that was what it was. It was about trying to shine a light on things that aren't so well known about in the wider world, and yet to structure it in seasons so that people knew what the topics were, and so that they tied together thematically. So that was the plan.
No, and I think it's a great example for others to reflect on about their own approach to content. The idea of theming, the idea of grouping them, because I'm sure there'd be some repurposing, coming along as well.
Yep.
In fact, on that subject, since I know you do a lot of that for your customers, before we close this discussion, can you give us a quick overview of the kind of repurposing you do currently that may inspire someone to think about it as well for their own content?
Yeah, obviously I'm a writer, but a lot of the people I work with aren't, and their primary content isn't. So I work with the guy who runs the #1 personal finance podcast in the UK. When I started working with him, he had hundreds of podcast episodes, but no written content. So the podcasts were repurposed into blog series, again on a theme based on his seasons. They've been turned into ebooks written from video or audio content into written is the easiest thing, but you can do it the other way. You can look at written content and break it down and work out how you might go about sharing that on video. You can turn them into resources, so workbooks. You can use them as a basis for an online course. The easiest thing to do, the quickest way to repurpose your content, is to pull out the key parts that you want to share on social media, usually Twitter, but you can share them elsewhere. If you've got a lot of data heavy information, you might want to turn that into an infographic, although I don't recommend asking me to make your infographic for you. So yeah, it tends to be blogs, ebooks, white papers is the kind of stuff I do, but I do help people come up with ideas to turn it around and do it the other way. So if they've got written content, to turn it into visual or audio content as well.
And I think that's a very helpful reminder that I'm sure as part of your work as a content strategist, you will go back to what someone has already and try and get more value from that effort before maybe you start something new, or at least at the same time as starting something new.
Definitely, because it's like we were saying about the content curation. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You know, if you've got what the term in the industry is your evergreen content, if you've got something that's useful for people and it's always going to be useful or might need, a slight update, start with that. Break that down into shorter blog posts, into list posts, into snappy sound bites you can share on Twitter. Create audio sound bites and share them. Create a video of you doing your top 10 tips. Do one at a time every week or every day. Just the way I think of content repurposing is that you've got this big lump of information that you're going to hit with a hammer and splinter it into little stones that you're then going to pop everywhere else. Just remembering, obviously, to always point everybody back to your website, because that's your home. That's the one thing you've got control of. So send those pebbles out, but make sure everybody's coming back to your homepage, your website, to find out more.
Yeah, and I think for me, sometimes the challenge when I make that recommendation for people, it feels like repetition. And I say, well, that's just you can see that, because many people have missed the content originally. So when it was created months, if not years ago, if it's evergreen, it's been missed, it's been forgotten about. And I think also, even though people may recognize it from, the version that was, they'll actually respect the fact that you try to create more value and extend its reach. So people won't be critical of seeing you repurposing your existing content, I can assure you.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, you're not plagiarizing yourself. It's allowed.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for spending some time with us. But before you go, I'm going to ask you to take part in a bit of a fun quiz. I hope you're ready for that. So it's not difficult questions, like a real pub quiz. But let's say if you were to have a Zoom call with a personality, maybe from the world of business, entertainment, or indeed writing, who would you like to invite on that Zoom call?
Oh, can I go for somebody from history instead?
Yes, of course. But since you've been in York with Romans around you can have anyone.
Yeah, one of my favourite people at the minute is Bess of Hardwick, who was actually at one very brief point a companion of Mary, Queen of Scots, just before she was executed. And what I like about Bess of Hardwick is that she was very independent, and she was married and widowed 4 times, and each time she lost her husband, she got wealthier, and she got to a point where women couldn't really be independent unless they had money behind them, and then nobody was going to challenge you. And so what she did was she then invested her money into building these fabulous houses, which are still there. Hardwick Hall, you can still go and visit. And I like the fact that she was independent, and that she put her passion into creating a beautiful house, several beautiful houses, and he sculpted these pleasure gardens. And I quite like this idea of, because I think it was her third husband was responsible for essentially keeping Mary Queen of Scots captive before she was unfortunately executed. And I like this idea of Bess of Hardwick and Mary Queen of Scots holed up in this room somewhere, and they did a lot of sewing And I like that juxtaposition of these two successful, powerful women sewing. And I think it'd be quite good to hear her anecdotes. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Excellent, fine choice. Next, if you were to have your own private online concert, let's say on Facebook Live, for you and your family, which artist or band would play for you?
Have you ever played that game where you do fantasy band and you put
No.
together, you pick musicians from bands and you put them together in a band that's never existed. So I've been working on my fantasy band for about 20 years. So that was what I would do. So I would have John Bonham on drums. So John Bonham from Led Zeppelin. I would have Hendrix on lead guitar. Who else have I got in my band? John Entwistle from The Who, because he's the world's best bass player. And I would have Rick Wright from Pink Floyd on keys. It doesn't really fit, but 70s Rick Wright was quite attractive, and I like the idea of sort of bringing in some random synths and stuff. And then my lead singer, I'm never quite sure about my singer, but I do need one. Maybe I'd have two singers.
Sure.
I'll have to think about that.
So it's almost the ultimate curation exercise just for the music world. You know?
It is. I mean, I have no idea what that would sound like, because these are all musicians who are, completely different. But yeah, that would be it, and then they just have to play whatever I wanted.
Yeah, well, that's what's happening. So it'll be the ultimate jamming session. So since you're having this incredible online concert, of course, you need to have food to go with it. So if you could order, any food meal for you and your family whilst watching the concert, what would you order?
I would like Mediterranean, but with the Turkish and the Greek influences, and a lot of hummus and olives and stuff like that. So a big spread, so everybody can just help themselves and pick as they go, and they listen to this cacophony of sound that I've lovingly put together for them.
Excellent. If you were to be invited to host your own radio show, what would you talk about, and who would be your co-host?
Oh, co-host. Well, obviously, I'm already doing a podcast about history. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a history and travel show. And who would I have as I would have Michael Palin, just because he's a Python. So I would have to get Michael Palin to talk about history and travel, and he would give that gravitas that I couldn't bring to it myself.
I'm sure.
Yeah, history and travel. So the history of the places that we travel, or he's travelled to, because he's obviously travelled further afield than I have.
So final question for you: when all this is behind us and we can travel again reasonably more freely, should I say, where would you like to go with you and your family? Where are you going to take your family?
I'm not taking the family. They can stay at home. Pompeii has been top of my list since my grandma went with her sister years and years and years ago. And I've always wanted to go and see Pompeii and Herculaneum. I find the idea of these perfectly preserved bodies a little bit disturbing, but also intriguing. And so as soon as I can get out to Italy, it might be a while, because I think Italy probably going to be top of the naughty list with us. But Pompeii is top of my list.
Excellent. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you, albeit virtually. And thank you again for joining in this conversation. If people have more questions for you, would like to see examples of your work, where can they find out more about Gudrun Lorett on the internet?
You can find me on my website, which is just gudrunlorett.com. I think you probably have to put that in the show notes, because it's a strange name. And come over and tweet me at Gudrun Lorett. That's probably where I'm most active. Is Twitter, and then my website for my blogs. My podcast is on my website or on the usual suspects.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you very much for joining me on this follow-up season to the Content Marketing Studio. To you, our viewers and listeners, thank you very much for your support. Do leave your comments, suggestions, and feedback in the usual places. Until next time, make sure you go out there and create better content faster. Bye for now.